After a long hiatus, I'm finally able to say today I'm going to complete this video series looking at the Diamond Select Ghostbusters figures. And this video is extra special for me because I believe that these are some of the best figures in the line because these are the ghosts. These are the most colourful and the most fun releases as part of this line, in my opinion. So let's start by looking at the most iconic ghost from the film series and indeed the animated series, The Real Ghostbusters. Let's look at Slimer. As noted in the two previous installments in this series, there were two release strategies for this wave of figures. They were in these oversized Diamond Select packages that will be familiar to anyone who's collected the Marvel Select figures across the years. This is big, chunky box. The reason for this is that it includes a pretty sizable diorama piece inside. The idea being that once you put all these pieces together from each figure, you can build the giant rooftop scene from the end of the film. But they also release these figures in a much slimmed down, smaller bubble packaging without the diorama piece. Now, there's definitely pros and cons for each style of packaging, but for someone who wants to build the diorama, then this was always going to be the one I was going to go for. And I must say, although the packaging is quite bulky and difficult to store, it is very presentable. We have these wonderful Ghostbusters colours, the branding there, we have the nice corner image of the character, which looks pretty good, and in the side panels, we have that same artwork, but writ large on this side of this huge, chunky side panel, which looks pretty cool. And of course, we can stack them up with the other figures in this line, and they look pretty striking. So if you want to stack these figures up horizontally on your shelf, they're going to look very nice on display. And then finally, the reverse of the packaging has a nice big photo of the figure itself, a little bit of bio about the character. At the bottom, we have a silhouette of the four Ghostbusters crossing the streams. We have some images of other figures in the wave, and of course, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have an image, promotional image, of the fully assembled diorama rooftop piece with all the figures on display there. So this looks really cool. No matter what you do with it, this packaging looks pretty striking and is always very presentable. Now, Slimer is a little bit challenging for toy companies to be able to produce a pretty accurate action figure because he is just essentially a floating blob and there's not an awful lot you can do with him. That said, I think Diamond Select have certainly risen to the challenge. The sculpting, to my eyes, looks pretty much pitch perfect. I think they've done a really excellent job. Now, of course, Slimer is transparent in the film, and in order to create that effect in an actual figure, you'd have to use some sort of translucent plastic, which I don't think would have the effect that we want. So, obviously, they've opted for a solid green plastic here with a very light yellow paint wash to create that slight luminous quality. It's very subtle, though, and it's just a hint, and I think it works really, really well. This is still very clearly Slimer. Now, to keep things interesting, they have given him two extra heads which just slide off and slide on very, very easily, which is great. We have this hot dog moment, which is great, so he's obviously filled his face there with hot dogs, greedy guzzler. I think this is really fun, it works very well, and of course, it accurately represents what we see on screen in the first film. So yeah, I think they've done a really good job with this. But he does come with a second head, which I have to be honest, I find really difficult to distinguish from the first head that he comes with in packaging. If we take a look at them side by side, I really can't see any difference between the two. I feel like maybe I'm missing something, so please, in the comments, if you do know the difference, please let me know. At first I did think maybe it was mine and maybe I was just mispackaged with the same head twice, but I've looked at other in-package photos and it does seem to have been intentional. I just can't understand why. As for articulation, well, he is fairly limited, but to be fair, he is just a gelatinous blob. You can't expect too much from him. He does have ball joints in his shoulders there, so he can kick his arms up and out a little distance, which is pretty cool. He does also have a pin swivel at his elbow there, so he can spin his lower arm around, and of course he can hinge it to virtually 90 degrees. Not quite, but almost. And then finally, there is a pin swivel at the wrist as well, so he can rotate his wrist 360 degrees and it does hinge forwards and backwards ever so slightly. And aside from his diorama, his extra heads and his stand, he doesn't come with any other additional accessories. And so, moving on to the library ghost. Now, this ghost is glimpsed only briefly in the film, but is the first and probably most colourful of all the ghosts that the Ghostbusters meet in the first film. Now, as I said, her appearance is very brief on camera, but I think Diamond Select have done a very nice job of rendering this into an action figure. Quite a tricky one to do, again, given its very ethereal quality, but I think they've managed to pull it off. In terms of the sculpting, it looks pretty accurate, certainly significantly in the head, and I think they've got the colouring and the paint apps just right. Like Slimer, because she's another floating character, she's a little bit limited on articulation because she doesn't have any legs. So we have a ball joint in the head, which allows her to spin her head from side to side. It can move up and down, but it's really just a very slight nod in truth. There is a ball joint in the shoulder though, which allows the arms to kick up and out a really healthy distance, and there's another pin swivel at the elbow there. So again, that lower arm can rotate 360 degrees, and of course it can hinge to about 90 degrees, which is great. There's another pin swivel at the wrist, so again, the hand can rotate all the way around, and of course it can hinge forwards and backwards all the way as well. So this is all good stuff. Now there does seem to be some articulation at the bottom of that skirt there that can move from side to side, but it's not really very useful in truth. Now it does look like she has some articulation in her upper ab region, but I can't seem to get it to work. It doesn't seem to really move up and down, and it doesn't swivel from side to side, so this feels a little bit redundant. It's well hidden though by the rubber rag, so it's certainly no hindrance. It's just a shame that it doesn't work the way it was intended. She does come with one accessory piece, and that is a stack of books, and I have to say they've done a really nice job of this, both in terms of the sculpt, because each one feels a little bit different, a little bit differently placed on that block there, on that pile, which is pretty cool, but they're also individually coloured and they have different markings on the spine, so these feel individual. It feels a little bit fun, and I think they've done a really nice job. Now, in terms of what you're supposed to do with it, not an awful lot. I think it's a nice thing to use as a prop in the background of any display or diorama you're going to create, but nevertheless, this is a really nice touch. Next up, we have the zombie cab driver. I have to say, I think this is one of the better figures in this wave, just because he has an increased amount of articulation, he has more of a human form, and is a really fun addition, because I think that an awful lot of work has gone into this figure. The sculpting is first rate. They've done a really good job of replicating that decayed corpse appearance that he has in the film. I love that he's given him his cap there as well, and I think this looks really, really good. The sculpt is great, the paint apps are really well applied, it looks really, really threatening, and I think they've done a great job. Likewise, we can see that applied to the rest of the body as well. Peppered throughout the figure are these individual rips and tears, which are really nice, and sometimes we can see a bit of zombie skin underneath there, and it looks really good. I think they've done a very nice job of A, the sculpting, but B, also the paint apps. For the main torso, he does have this rubber jacket, which looks really good, because at first it could be mistaken for being solid plastic. It looks really firm and solid, but actually you can get in there and pull it apart a little bit, and it looks really good. It's very malleable, and it's a really nicely painted piece. And this continues all the way down the figure through the legs and into the feet. And we can actually see the feet are completely different. We have one foot in a shoe that's sort of falling apart, and then one that's completely barefoot. So very different feet. Miraculously, doesn't cause any problems when it comes to him standing freely. He seems to stand freely perfectly well, and there isn't too many issues of him toppling over, which is fantastic. Now, he does fare slightly better than his other ghostly brethren in terms of the articulation. He has a ball joint in the head, so he can spin his head all the way around. It can look up and down a healthy distance as well. There are ball joints in the shoulders, so the arms kick up and out. There's a bicep swivel as well, and there is a hinge at the elbow, so he can bend his arm very neatly to 90 degrees there, and there is a pin swivel at the wrist. So again, that wrist can rotate 360 degrees, and of course, hinge forwards and backwards. There's a swivel at the waist, so he can spin from side to side. And thankfully, because that jacket is made of rubber, it does not hinder the articulation whatsoever. It is fairly free moving without any hindrance, which is fantastic. He has a hinge at the hip there, so he can kick his legs out. There's also a thigh swivel as well. The legs can kick forwards, and they can just about go backwards as well. There's a double jointed knee, so the lower legs can kick all the way back there, which is great. And then there is an ankle pivot as well, so that foot can move from side to side and hinge forwards and backwards. In terms of accessories, he just comes with this steering wheel and not a lot else. I think this is a nice little prop for him to have. It's not air-shattering, but it's just a little extra, and I think it's kind of fun. So all in all, I think this is a really successful figure. I think it looks fantastic, and I think they've just done a really good job with him. Okay, so moving on now to the film's main antagonist. Of course, it's Gozer. Now, being such an important character, there is a certain level of anticipation with this figure, and I'm not entirely sure it's been met in truth. So first off, I think the sculpting is good, not perfect though. I think they've definitely caught the likeness of the actor. I think they've got the overall look and design, but things just aren't quite right. Those eyes, for example, just seem a little too dark red. They should have been slightly brighter red in my opinion. Likewise, it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a lighter wash in the hair, and maybe just something a little bit more luminous about the paint apps that they've used for the body of the figure, because you don't really get that sparkly sense that we do in the film. I think the body for the most part is well sculpted and nicely painted. There's a number of different washes. We can see white, pink, various shades of pink in fact. So I think this looks pretty good, but I think the predominant colour we're coming away with here is a sort of soft pink, and really I think it should have been more of a white, should have been the more prevailing colour, but maybe that's just me. I did think it was worth pointing out that she does of course have heels and has a very small foot, so in terms of balance this can be a real issue if you want your figure to stand freely without the use of a peg stand, because she is going to topple over from side to side a lot of the time. In terms of articulation though, she does have a ball joint in the head, so she can move her head all the way from side to side. She can look up and down a fairly decent distance as well, so no complaints here. She's got another ball joint in the shoulder as well, so of course she can lift her arms up and back, which is great. There's a pin swivel at the elbow, so that lower arm can rotate all the way around, and it does hinge to about 90 degrees, which is great. There's another pin swivel at the wrist as well, so of course that hand rotates through 60 degrees, and it hinges forwards and backwards with no resistance, which is fantastic. There's another ball joint in the chest as well, so she can move from side to side with that, but she can't really move forwards or backwards or lean from side to side either, which is a shame. She's also got those hinge in the hips, which look particularly bad if you're going to do something like this, so you have to be very careful when it comes to the articulation in terms of what poses you're going to put her in, because this doesn't look great. But she can kick her legs forwards and backwards as well, which is the definite bonus, and she has a double jointed knee, so she can kick that lower leg all the way back there. There is that ankle pivot of course at the base of the foot there, so she can move that foot from side to side and hinge it forwards and backwards just about. She does actually have a couple of extra pieces aside from her diorama piece, so she has an extra pair of hands and an alternate head. Sadly though, both sets of accessories just seem to be a little bit redundant, because the alternative hands are just a very slight variant on what we have with the open hands that we've already got on the figure. So these are very slightly curved. There's not really much in it, to be honest, and I think this would have been better served if it had been a fist or a closed hand or something like that to make them really different. Likewise, the alternate head is virtually indistinguishable to my eyes to the head that we're given on the figure in the packaging anyway. It looks pretty much to be the same sculpt. Granted, you can see some teeth, but I'm not sure if that's just the paint apps have just bled into the original, so I really can't see what a huge difference between these heads, and I think what we really needed was a very different expression on this face to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, what's the point really? All in all, there's something very disappointing about this figure. She's slightly gawky, the proportions don't seem quite right, and she definitely has real struggles when it comes to standing her up freely without the use of any support. So yeah, a real shame, because it's such an important character. It's not a bad figure by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a little bit underwhelming. And then finally, we have the Terror Dog. I think this is a really cool release, very unexpected. I didn't think we were going to get an action figure of this, so I think it's very cool. It's very different to anything else in the collection, or that I believe that Diamond Select have ever produced, to be fair. So I think this is a really fun, unique piece. And I have to say, I think in terms of the sculpt and the paint apps, they've pretty much nailed this beast. This looks pretty awesome. There's an awful lot of detailing, both in the skin and the texture of that skin, that sort of raw leather appearance. I love the expression on the face, the detailing in the mouth, the tongue and the teeth, the eyes, the horns. It all looks really good, and of course, it's all painted really, really lovely. There's no smudging here. It all looks really authentic to what we see on screen. I think they've just done a pretty fantastic job all in all. This is one of the highlights of the entire collection in my opinion. And I have to say, he comes with an awful lot, a surprising amount of articulation. First of all, of course, he has a hinged jaw, so he can open his mouth, he can close the mouth. I think that's absolutely fantastic, really, really good, and it's a fantastic range of motion that he's got in that jaw as well, so you can do all sorts of different poses with him to create different looks, which is great. He's also got a ball joint in the head, so he can move his head from side to side and nod it up and down a little bit. There's a further ball joint at the lower neck as well, so again, he can really swivel it from side to side. It can't really move forwards or backwards. There's another ball joint at the lower body, so he can move his body up and down here and from side to side, so there's actually a good deal of articulation there. He's got ball joints in the shoulders of each arm, so those arms can move forwards and backwards. There's also a pin swivel at the elbow as well of each of these joints, so again that can rotate from side to side and hinge to about just less than 90 degrees. And then there's also ankle pivots at the feet as well as a hinge, so of course those feet move forwards and backwards. So they've done a pretty solid job. There's even more in the back leg than is in the front leg. There's an extra additional couple of points of articulation here that allow the lower leg to swivel from side to side and hinge forwards and backwards. And there's actually a fair amount of things you can do with this articulation. It is surprisingly versatile, so if you want, you can really have him kicking up his legs, or you can have him just sitting like a good boy. But there's a various amount of things you can do, and he always looks pretty good no matter what pose you put him in. In terms of extras, he does come with an additional pair of horns. These are a much shorter version of the horns that he has, and I think the idea might be that you can buy a second Terror Dog and just be able to distinguish the two. For his diorama piece though, he comes with this wonderful holographic poster, and the reason I pull it out is because I think it's really, really impressive. I think it looks really good, but you could just use this if you wanted to create your own diorama piece to just put this figure in front of. So I think it's a really nice, fun extra to come with this figure. To be honest, I wasn't really expecting much from this figure at all, and he really surprised me. I actually think he's one of my favourites in the entire collection. He's really faithful to what we see on screen. He's a really fun, very different kind of figure to have in your collection, and he looks fantastic. Now, for the completers who bought all 15 figures in this line and got the deluxe editions with the diorama piece, you will have been rewarded with the ability to build the rooftop diorama. Now, this is a hulking huge set piece that nicely finishes off this collection and gives you somewhere to display all of your figures at once, which is absolutely phenomenal. Sadly, I'm still missing 3 figures from my collection, so I'm just shy of building this massive diorama, but I can already see it is going to be one of my centerpiece displays. And looking at various photos online, I can tell you that the photos don't do it justice. It does not capture the size and scale of this display because it is absolutely gigantic. I haven't measured it exactly, but it looks to be roughly 1 meter long and half as deep. So if you do decide to build this, then you're going to have to make sure that you've got plenty of space to put it on display. Regardless, it's a really cool thing that Diamond Select have created for us, and I was always a little bit hesitant whether we'd actually get the full set because Diamond Select do have a history of starting ideas like this and never finishing them. One notable example, of course, would be the Enterprise Bridge, where a similar diorama piece would come with each figure, and the idea is that you build the whole bridge, but sadly that never was completed. But this one thankfully has been, and it is really effective, and I have to say they've done a tremendous job on this, and all told this is quite a wonderful collection of toys to have. It's very full. I can't really imagine what else they could have really thrown in here. This is a very nice, loving tribute to the first Ghostbusters film. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.